So, welcome everyone to the second episode of Red Alert. I'm Adam Murray, and today my guest is Dr. Stephen Nolan from Trademark, a colleague of Mel Corry's who did the first episode. Stephen, you're very welcome.
Thanks for inviting me on. I'm gutted that I'm number two to Mel, which is a bit of an insult. But there you go. You know what I mean? I want to take that on. I want to take that on. Does that take that one on the chin, as Boris Johnson would say?
Well, there was a reason to the madness there. I wanted to talk to Mel first about the social situation and the workers themselves who are affected by the current crisis, and then expand that into talking to you about the economic situation. So for anyone who wants to know more about Trademark, because you both work for Trademark, anyone who wants to know more about that, they can go back and hear Mel's episode. But I'd like to just jump straight into the economics with yourself, Stephen, because I know that I've known you for a while now, and you're a man who keeps a very close eye on the money markets and the stock markets and the likes of what the Financial Times would be saying, not so that you can gamble on the stock markets, but more so that you have an ear to what capitalism is saying to itself. And so I suppose the big question I want to ask you is, during this crisis, global lockdown, businesses being furloughed and everything and all sorts of stuff, what is capitalism saying to itself at this time?
Well, the interesting thing about the COVID-19 crisis is that the fall in stock market prices began before the crisis began. Everyone's kind of forgotten that now. It's only been written out of history. It was on about, I think, February 20th that the likes of BlackRock and Vanguard and Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, Citigroup, Google, Apple, Amazon, Facebook all dumped about 15 to 20% of their shares. And that would have started, or did start, a stock market crash. Now, whether they did that because they knew lockdown was coming and the economic system was going to be closed down, I don't know. But we were going to have a recession anyway. That was happening as regardless. What the COVID-19 thing has done, of course, is kicked the entire world economy off the edge of a cliff. And that's the position we're in now. And it's strange and weird for all of us, because capitalism has gone into crisis because we've closed it down. If you know what I mean, it's shut down. So that's unique. That's not happened before in world history.
Well, that's a word.
We're living in interesting times, you know.
That is a word that seemed to be used a lot at the beginning. Was this unprecedented, that this had never happened before? And we have had we've had recessions, we've had depressions, we've had inflation and stagflation. All these terms I kind of remember from secondary school, but I don't really understand them all. But this is, as you say, this global lockdown, shutting the economy for a health reason, has not happened before. I know that celebrities aren't really having a good of a time of it, because they're not getting as much attention as they wanted, and they're making all these videos from their mansions saying, "Oh, I'm so bored," and what are we supposed to do? But what are the tycoons and the titans of industry? Because I don't see them crying about boredom. I see them rather either one of two things: one, posting glamorous photographs from their various yachts, or posting sob stories about how their businesses are suffering and they need a corporate bailout. They need a hand from the state and from us, the taxpayer. So,
well, they're doing what they did in 2008. They're preparing to reconsolidate class power. And this time around, the opportunities they have to do that are even greater than last time, which is a real concern. There's no doubt that what you're going to see emerging from this initially is the disappearance of millions of small businesses. Small to medium enterprises will go out. They're already using the furlough scheme in the UK to get rid of workers and to get rid of, as they would see it, as things they can't afford to pay for anymore. But at a bigger level, you're going to see mass monopolization. You're going to see the big oil companies take over the small oil companies because of the crisis in the oil market. You're going to see monopolization within the financial sector, as well as bigger financial houses take over smaller ones that are suffering. So if anything, they're going to come out of this a lot more powerful than they went into it, because of course, as you know, they use these crises and this particular crisis as a means to, again, reconsolidate themselves. So there's a lot of starry-eyed naivety about how we're going to come out of this with some sort of green socialist revolution, and that simply isn't going to happen, because we are not in a position to take advantage of the crisis, unfortunately.
That's certainly
now that might change things, over the next 6 months or a year, but at the moment, capital is going to monopolize and come out of this extremely powerful, and that's a real concern.
Well, certainly,
and as you said, with having been supported and bailed out by the state, of course, as you said.
Well, I know that ecological socialism and things like that are what the left are calling for, and no return to normal is a rallying cry me and Mel were talking about, that I think is picked up by a lot of different people. But as you say, that all of those words and all of those battle cries and all of those starry-eyed dreaming of a better world doesn't matter very much unless you have the power, the state power, to actually implement it. And I think
exactly.
the monopolization issue is terrifying, really, because I mean, so many industries are already so monopolized. Lenin, it's his 150th, the anniversary of his 150 years since he was born, and I remember when I started reading Lenin, one of the first things I picked up of his was looking at banks, and it was talking about there were these many thousands of banks across Europe and Russia, and then it became hundreds, and then it became dozens, and now you have a handful of very large global banking groups. The small to medium businesses are obviously going to be very, very hard hit by this. One thing that's in my head though is after the 2008 financial crash, there was obviously a massive move to shift the debt and the burden of that onto the public, and that was justified, although it was obviously nonsense, but it was justified ideologically as we have to cut budgets and privatize to balance our own books. You have to keep a good book as a householder. You have to keep your income and your outgoings relative. So, but there seems to be nothing left they can cut. They've cut so much. So how are they going to? What are the politicians going to do coming out of this? The capitalists will, as you say, buy up anyone struggling and monopolize. But what's the political message, do you think, going to be coming out the other end of this?
Well, I suppose the idea is that beatings will continue until morale improves. That's the only policy they have, and they will find places to cut. They will find things to close down. They will find things to privatize. Their job's never done. The idea that neoliberalism is over is kind of a nonsense. It is. I mean, certainly COVID-19 has laid bare the fragilities of the system, of the capitalist system. But whether it's brought irreversible structural and kind of societal change to bear is another matter. That's but there is an opportunity there. I don't want to be too downbeat about it. There's an opportunity there but I'm not entirely sure we're in a position and have the power to take advantage of those opportunities. That's the idea. People keep calling for, as you said, well, we need a Green New Deal coming out of this. We need to nationalise all companies. It's a perfect opportunity. Now, if there was a left government, if there were 27 left governments in the EU, we might be able to do that, but there aren't, so we won't. So those are just corporate cries into the wilderness. The state and capital are embedded partners. Why would the state call for a left-wing policy? And they're not going to do it. They serve capital, and until we take control of the state, they're going to continue to serve capital. That seems to me to be the kind of start and end of that conversation, unfortunately. So it's back to what we've done on the left for years, which is just build from the ground up. But we've got a long way to go.
And since the fall of the Soviet Union and the loss of confidence, certainly amongst what it would be typically referred to as like the hard left by the mainstream media, the European Union is a really interesting case that I think a lot of people now are maybe starting to have a rethink of, because what we've seen is the central countries like Germany not offering support to the likes of Italy and Spain, but those countries very much being left to defend for themselves. And this bailout deal, or whatever they're calling it, they didn't call it Corona bonds in the end, did they? But this deal has been hailed as, the European Union finally, after much negotiation, figured out a way to save everybody and come to an agreement. Is that really the true story, or is that them massaging the reality?
The European Union has always been brilliant at soft power. That's its main kind of way to convince people that it's a force for good in the world. Is this soft power, this soft propaganda? That's a big friendly family of nations all coming together to help each other. And these crises, both of 2008 and this one, have shown that clearly not to be the case. What they've done with Italy is crucify it. I mean, Italy is not going to come out of this in any way good. And again, it's just back to that phrase, beatings will continue until morale improves. They were refusing to spread the cost of the debt across Europe. That's really what it is. So Germany politically can't take any of the debt that Italy wants to sell on the market through Corona bonds. So what they've done is they've extended the functions that already exist within the EU to allow Italy to access some more debt, but not going to share that debt. It's going to be lumped on top of Italy and Italy alone to repay. So there's no sharing of the burden. And so it's revealed the reality of the European Union once again to those of us who really understand the reality of the European Union. It's not a big friendly family of nations. It exists to benefit a couple of core central economies like Germany and France. and the rest can go to fuck, and that's
And
what's going to happen.
it did look like there was a period between the 2008 crash and this crisis, right up to quite recently. Actually, there was a period when I think a lot of people on the left, the people who would consider themselves even socialists as well, were looking at the likes of Corbyn and Sanders and thinking, right, this is a resurgence of social democracy in the face of neoliberalism, a return to, you know, a capitalist state that at least spends some money on supporting the poorest people or the most suffering people. Both of those seem to be utterly dashed, both by internal sabotage, which the leaked report from the Labour Party in Britain has shown, from a very hostile media, and just from the fact that socialists start with an uphill battle trying to use a parliamentary road to socialism. But I mean, the there is. Do you see any other? Because I mean, I think you and I share a somewhat pessimistic outlook sometimes. But do you see, with the collapse of the Corbyn and Sanders attempts, do you see anywhere in Europe or America that has a chance to push back against this neoliberalism at the moment, or is the left in Europe and America still not getting the picture that you can't massage and reform this situation in your own way? You know, that the European Union can't be reformed into a socialist project, and the United States of America, even the Democrats, in the face of the most far right president they've ever had, can't elect a man who calls himself a democratic socialist, never mind an actual socialist.
Yeah, I'm not one to denigrate the efforts of other leftists and even social democrats. I mean, I think that any work and any activism that seeks to improve the quality of people's lives and seeks to challenge the system, the dominant system, it's all good work. It's whether that work is pointing in the right direction or moving towards a different direction. So could you argue that the Corbyn project or the Corbyn manifesto were setting things in place that open the door to even more radical changes in the future? That's really what the question is for me, as opposed to just sort of standing shouting in the wind about a revolution, which is never really going to come. And I think that the Corbyn project did open certain doors to a different kind of future. There were things that could have been built on. Because even for those that understand social democracy, initially social democracy was the idea of an evolutionary move towards socialism. Now, by the 1970s, it had stopped. It had become fossilized, and it became a system that said, actually, capitalism's dead on. We just need to take the rough edges off it. And
But that's, I think that's my
Corbyn
question.
kind of went back to an older form, I suppose, of social democracy. Social democracy, they looked at setting the groundwork or building the foundational blocks for radical changes to challenging capital. Now, whether if he got into power, he would actually challenge the real power of capital is probably unlikely. Labour, they tried it once before back in the 1970s with their alternative economic strategy, which was written by Tony Benn, and it was extremely radical, and more radical than the 1948 programme. But of course, as soon as Labour got into power, boom, it was gone, it was done. I imagine the right of the party would have done the same this time around. That's not to say that there haven't been significant shifts in political discourse in Britain. It's not to say there aren't hundreds of thousands of activists who are now tackling the issue of socialism or what it means to be a socialist. That's all good. I mean, I'd rather have people learning about socialism, what it means, than not, and simply being kind of adapting themselves to neoliberal ways of thinking. So there's positives in all of that. And the left in the Labour Party have colonised a bit of space there. It's bigger than it was before. We can work with them. I can talk to people and we can have chats about strategy. So building the left is something that you have to do gradually and in everywhere and in every place you can. And I think that's useful. So I'm an optimist in that sense.
But to circle back somewhat to the issue of the European Union, for example, because obviously Britain has started to make moves, or I'm not entirely sure where exactly they are on leaving the European Union at this point and how this COVID thing throws that into the air. But certainly in terms of the Republic of Ireland, still very much in the European Union. Most people, opinion polls suggest, very favourable towards the European Union, despite the debt leveled on them post 2008. So, for when you're working within that context, I suppose, how do you approach that stumbling block of the Europeans' constitutional documents? Do you see across Europe the lefts within each different country talking to one another? I know that you would have contacts across Europe through the likes of the Rosa Luxemburg program and things like that. Is that something that leftists are realizing? Because it does seem to me that the only way you're ever going to address the European Union issue is by working across borders with various different left-wing parties,
you have to work internationally. You have to work with
But
people
should that be?
On an international basis, of course. But the reality is, most of the left in Europe and most electoral, not all, most, but the vast majority are pro-European and even quite Euro-federalist, which is a real shock and a real pity. And there's some very strange emotional attachments that people on the left in Europe have to the structure of the European Union. And all we can do is keep going back to the treaties and say, look, the treaty says A, B, C, and D. These are pro-capital. These are capitalist ways forward. These are neoliberal ways of thinking. These are neoliberal structures. And as a socialist, I cannot support them. I mean, for me, it's, a socialist cannot support the European Union. It's as simple as that. I don't know. It's not an emotional position. It's a position of rationality and logic. If the various treaties almost makes it illegal for states to intervene to assist their people, it makes it illegal for states to intervene to the point where this crisis, they've had to throw all them rules out the window because they don't work in a crisis. And we're about to enter an epochal crisis of climate change with a European Union that won't let us do anything about it. I mean, if you want an example of that, just read the detail of the European Green New Deal, which is fucking pathetic. I mean, it's laughably bad in terms of how it's going to respond to the biggest crisis the planet's ever seen. So I can't support a system that won't let us tackle climate breakdown. I can't support a system that won't let us intervene to assist people. I can't support a system which supports capital above all else. It's as simple as that to me. And it's being a socialist and supporting the EU are entirely incompatible. I honestly don't see why other socialists don't see that. I'm still shocked.
It's unfortunate, as you said. It doesn't seem to be the left across Europe has woken up to that reality. That to reform these fundamental treaties within the European Union, you would need consensus of all governments in the European Union. I sat down once and made a chart and went through them all. They are overwhelmingly centre-right governments or some centre-right alliance with liberals. So the idea that you could get a socialist government elected in each of those and then overthrow those treaties is no small order.
Well, you've seen the attitude of the Dutch and the Germans towards the Corona bonds fiasco and Italy is that it's as if they'd rather see Italy leave the EU than change anything about the EU at all. So in that sense, it's completely irreformable from so many different ways, and it just can't be reformed. And what you're going to see, unfortunately, is a slow and tragic breakup of that union. And it won't be it won't be like left-wing governments deciding to leave. It will be right-wing governments saying, fuck this, we're out. And that's a danger. That's a real danger for those countries because you can have right-wing governments, even without any of the pressures and the international pressure from other EU countries to stop them doing horrendous things to their minorities and to refugees and to migrants and migrant workers. So the EU, it's almost cutting off its nose to spite its face.
For me, as a person, a left-wing person, I grew up fairly pro-EU. In fact, so pro-EU that in secondary school I did European studies, and myself and a few others won a competition to design a leaflet advertising how great the European Union is, which is in hindsight, a very propagandistic task for school children. But the prize for winning that was to be one of a number of groups of young people who went to Strasbourg to the Parliament, and got to see the Parliament there. So I was actually, even when I was moving towards joining a socialist party and things like that, there was a part of me that was that emotional part of me, that you referenced, that emotional sort of like it's kept peace in Europe and it's blah 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 and all these things that they feed you that you think that it's the bee's knees. But I remember, it was Greece. It was Greece after 2008. Greece said, we've had a public debate and a referendum. We would rather go down a different route than austerity. We want to try and invest in certain sectors. And the European Union not only said, well, you're not going to do that. It actually said, well, see the grueling austerity budget that we'd offered you. That's off the table now. And here's a worse one for having the temerity to ask. I wonder how many people will now, after this current round of European crises, will be looking at the way Italy has been treated and the way Spain has been treated, and be rethinking that emotional attachment, or at least the head has to make a decision that the heart doesn't want to.
Yeah, there's a weird. It's very strange, and it is emotional rather than. I mean, the idea that if you support the EU, you're by definition an internationalist, and yet what the EU does with the common agricultural policy to our environment is one of the most, environmentally destructive policies known to man, Cap. What the EU does to African farmers by dumping cheap goods all over Africa, denying them the opportunity to sell their goods into Europe. This misses millions of Africans, and we're looking at apparently fucking Africa. The EU and the EU's policies are part of that. They encourage that. They do that. There's all these great internationalists that keep slagging us off for not liking the EU. Don't really give a fuck about other parts of the world. What they give a fuck about is themselves and their own lifestyles. I mean, the idea that socialists and communists aren't internationalists, it was called the first international for a fucking reason, because it was the first international. Because it's ours, it belongs to us. It's the solidarity of labour, not the solidarity of capital that we represent. And the EU represents the solidarity amongst national capitals. That's not what it is to be a socialist. I'm sorry. It's for me. It's as simple as that.
Absolutely, it couldn't get more black and white than the way you've put it there. And look, people can rethink the attachment they have to the European Union. I've done it myself. I know that there are other young people out there today who are doing it. All we can hope for, I suppose, is that more and more people start to see past the rosy rhetoric of it all and see the reality that lies behind it. There's just
that's right. I mean, another Europe is possible. Another EU isn't. That's just it's as simple as that. We can build this Europe, but not through the EU.
With the climate change, I think absolutely you're 100% right. We're going to see more and more climate refugees and more people having to move to more temperate climates. And the far right seem absolutely poised over the next 10 years to make hay out of the various climate and refugee crises that are coming down the line. The thing about the bailouts, just to circle back to that, the capitalists, as you say, the wealthy, the likes of Branson, talking about the potential collapse of Virgin. They're saying that these big corporations, they need taxpayer money to keep them afloat, and obviously a lot of workers are invested in these firms. They have jobs there and such. But what do you think is the most responsible thing? The most responsible response to this? Is it to give them a further bailout, or is it to allow them to go into liquidation, pay off their workers and collapse, essentially? I mean, those seem to be the options. Either the state keeps...
Well, it all depends on what... Yeah, but the state can assist those firms with conditions, or it can set up a state holding company and buy them and bring them under state ownership. And as Roosevelt did back in the 30s, it doesn't have to just give money and provide liquidity for private companies to survive this crisis. The state should do it with conditions. In 2008, we bailed out the entire financial system. I think at one point, something along the lines of 60% of world GDP was mobilized within a couple of years to save capitalism. It's fucking incredible. More money was mobilized then than was mobilized the First World War, the Second World War, the Korean War, and the Vietnam War. Was mobilized to save an unregulated banking system. So the state can and should perhaps save some of those industries. It should bring them into state holding companies. It should use that period to begin the transition to, a just transition to convert those companies to companies which can do more progressive, sustainable things.
Yeah.
So there are opportunities, but it won't, of course, do these things. This is the point I'm making before, because we don't have the power. And these progressive left ideas don't exist. They've been spoken about, I suppose, more than ever before. The danger is that increasingly authoritarian states take some of these ideas and adopt them for their own ends, in that sense of increasing authoritarian state control over production, but one which isn't socialist.
Well, we've seen
one
Orban,
which is more national socialist. That's the real danger here. It's it's the idea that, well, it's the good, the bad, and the ugly, isn't it? The good is some sort of eco-socialist future. The bad is, bailouts without conditions, and the ugly is the emergence of increasing authoritarian and fascist states.
In Eastern Europe, absolutely.
Yeah. You'll probably see more than that.
It does paint a very grim picture, doesn't it? I suppose if there was, before we wrap up today, because I would absolutely love to talk to you about some of the things that you've been posting online about modern monetary theory and stuff like that. But I know that that's a work in progress, and we'll come back to that another time. But how yeah.
No, we'll do that. We'll do that next week. Do that next time. Do that next time, because it really is important. Because one of the things that the crisis has highlighted, one of the things that the crisis has done is it's begin to to smash all these capitalist shibboleths about the way the economy works. Now, that's a really important step for any of us on the left who've been working against these neoliberal capitalist narratives for 20 years, is that, we're trying to provide counter narratives and different ways of thinking about the world. And it's all happening around us now in real time. So things like how money works and how capital works, these things are really crucial to understand. And the modern monetary theory stuff and direct monetary finance, the way the government's financed in their response to COVID, we've been shouting about that for 10 years, and the government's finally admitted, actually, you're right, this is the way money. Yeah, I'm happy to have that conversation, because they're really important narratives really for the left to get their head around. Because people will all tell you, we can't afford it, there isn't any money. And then the government says, actually, no, there's loads of money. We've got loads of money.
Well, I'm really looking forward to seeing that come out of the Trademark podcast itself, and we'll be sure to share that around. I'll share that around as well, and then maybe we can come back to it down the line when things have developed even further. But look, before we wrap up, Stevie, this is obviously it's a grim picture out there. As you say, we're not in power. A lot of the left is wedded to the European Union. The far right seems poised to make huge gains, and capitalism seems to be verged on further automation and monopolization of business to put more and more small and medium businesses out of business. But before we go, is there any message of hope or any encouragement that you can give us as we go forward? There has to. Is there a light at the end of the tunnel? Is there something that we should keep in mind as we go forward, or?
Well, so the only thing that we've all enjoyed, I hope we're not too cynical. There's an awful lot of cynical bastards on the left that need to fucking be less cynical and more hopeful. Is that there's been a shift and certainly a change or a rupture in accepted social values. The idea of mutual aid and solidarity and community organising and respect and care for those around us, people who 2 minutes before you didn't give a fuck about, that's really important, because those are the values that socialists believe in. We believe in solidarity, mutual aid, community organising, and people are perhaps and hopefully recognising how important they are, and also that's who we are, that we're not competitive, that we're not capitalists, that we're not sociopaths, we're caring, loving human beings. And me, that's been the real positive about this, and because those are the values that underpin socialism. And so that's a real positive for me, and that's one of the things that I'm going to make sure that on my part that I try and make sure survives this and comes out the other end, that those values remain alive, and we just attach a little bit of ideology and a little bit of policy and a little bit of organising to those values, and hopefully take it from there, and also the idea that because all these capitalist shibboleths are crashing around us, political education becomes even more important now, and even easier, because the emperor's new clothes, the emperor's bollock naked now, and we should be able to point out more than ever before the contradictions of this fucking ridiculous economic system.
Yeah,
it's time to get rid of it and move to another one that promises solidarity.
I saw a quote earlier in the week on Facebook, I think it might have been, that said, no one learns socialism from a book. We are born socialists. We're born caring human beings who want to see others do well. And it's that actually we are taught along the way all of the stuff that's anti-socialist, which is, look out for number one. It's a dog eat dog world. Build your own empire and this sort of thing. Hopefully that is being challenged in a really big way, and we're seeing communities all across Ireland and all across Europe supporting one another physically and emotionally and through food and protection and things like that. So, well, look, it's been really great talking to you today. Hopefully the first conversation of many. I look forward to hearing the next Trademark podcast when you talk about modern monetary theory and things like that. That's all I have to say, really. Thank you so much.